Well, that didn't work. That thing bottomed out. That's probably not the right bolt then. Okay, third time's a charm. Hello everyone, welcome back to Maverick Mods. This week on the Firebird again. You know, at any point in any build, you're gonna have, for lack of a better term, grunt work. There's just a lot of things to reassemble, a lot of things to do. Sometimes sometimes it can get pretty tedious, but it has to be done. And frankly, you know, I'm not a big fan of watching videos where guys just put random parts back on a car. Having said that, here's a video about me just putting random stuff back on the car. Grab your popcorn, let's get started. I lost count at somewhere north of 1,000 things left to do on the Firebird. Everything from accessories on the engine to wiring to brakes to, well, you know, here's a short list of all the things that I need to do, and here's a short list of all the things I'm going to try and get done in this video. Okay, I probably won't get all of that done, but let's at least try and make a dent. So here we go. Let's start off with, let's do the accessories on the engine. How's that? Well guys, I've been working on just various parts and pieces on the engine. Got something planned for the wiring harness. We're going to get to that here pretty quick. I've been working on cleaning up my accessory brackets, which I've got a big pile of them right here, ready to go back on. Bolts, brackets, etc. And so I'm going to work on getting the accessories on the front of the engine. Just because it's easy to get to, I've been working on the heater hoses. And you're going to question, why do that now? Well, the Z28 has basically formed a metal hoses that just connect at the ends, which is pretty neat. I'd kind of like to keep that. So I'm going to keep it. The difference being that right up in here, this is the old bracket, or this is the bracket that actually bolted to the frame, and on the Z28 it bolted right here. Of course, now I moved everything just enough that there's about a 3-inch or so difference in where this bolts to the original location on the Z28 frame versus where it actually rests. So what I'm going to do, it can ride right here just fine if I just put a little bit of a wrap around this part of the hose. I mean, you know, I think I can secure that pretty well without needing this bracket. So I need to cut this bracket off, and then basically I can put the heater hoses in. Once in a while, when you're in the middle of car building, car rebuilding, whatever I'm doing, you need to stop and do car repair. And I just faced this. This is the newly, freshly cleaned and painted air conditioner bracket. Really great. Problem is, I've got a pulley here, or idler pulley, that it needs to be replaced. The bolt in it is one of those Torx. I think it's a T60 or T55, I think. And all I managed to do was strip out the center of the bolt. It's in there pretty good. So my first thought was, well, maybe I'll get the air hammer out, catch an edge of it, maybe I can loosen it, start spinning it off. That didn't work. Or I should say, it hasn't worked so far. Plan B to get this bolt head off. This may not be the smartest thing I've done today, but I'm going to see if I can't just cut the head off, slide the pulley off, and grab what's left of the shank of the bolt and be able to turn it out that way. Let's see if this works. Hey, it worked. I'll bet you I've got a replacement bolt somewhere. Probably won't be a Torx head, but I don't think that's going to make any difference here. And yeah, this bearing is well on its way to worn out, but I do have a new one. Gotta screw this one in just a little bit to get my little air ratchet or electric ratchet in. I'll give those bolts a final tighten, and we'll get this idler pulley finished up, and the air conditioner will be at least installed on the engine. Getting the rest of the accessories hooked up kind of one at a time. I got the air conditioner done. I even got the belt on. Everything's good, new pulley. Working on power steering right now. We got to get this in place before I get the alternator in, because my clearance on my line's down here at the steering rack. Alright, in theory, the power steering's hooked up. Next, we'll get the idler pulley in, or not the idler pulley, the, what is this thing? The tensioner pulley. It just mounts right here. Torque to factory spec. Now I'm going to see if I can get the alternator in with the alternator bracket mounted. It might work, it might not. I may have to pull the bracket, mount the alternator to the bracket, and then put the bracket in. We'll see. Or is it just going to be easier? It's just going to be easier to pull the whole bracket out. Alright, let's just do it this way. Alright, so this guy fits in this way. That's a nice little interference fit there. So I might have to actually get this on the vise and tap this sucker in, because it's a little bit of a, it's not a puzzle, but it's a little bit of a stinker. Alright, let me get this in the vise and we'll tap this in. Okay, so I've got the alternator in with the bracket. Couple of bolts here to line it up. Thing should just slide right in here. There's one. There's two. There's the third. Alright, I'll just kind of snug those. I've got one back behind there that I need to line up as well. It kind of holds the back of the alternator up. How can I get to it? Right like that. Alright, so my rear bracket's in. I can go ahead and tighten these. Let's get this one. Okay, with alternator, power steering, air conditioner separate, water pump and tensioner pulley. Now, might as well put the belt on. Let's see if it fits. See if I can remember how to put it on. So the question is, what's the routing? And this is where your phone comes in handy. Because about a year ago, I knew that this question was going to come up. So I took a picture of the sticker that was on the side part of the firewall on the Z28. So I'm just going to follow this. So of course you start off here on the crank, come around the idler pulley, that's going to go up there. This part comes around, comes down under the alternator. So up over the power steering, then it comes back down under the water pump. And I obviously did something wrong already because I got way too much, oh, that's why. Because it came loose from the crankshaft. All right, so good, 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 good. There, there, there. All right, now all I gotta do is find myself something to pull that tension. That's all I gotta do is find myself, I believe it's probably a 13 millimeter. It's not. Is it a 15? It's not. There's only one in between. Figures, aftermarket parts, nothing else on this vehicle is 14 millimeter except that. So I should be able to down. And there we go. Belt's on. Why put it on now? Why not? And I will save that diagram that I took a photo of, since obviously it was on the firewall of the old car and it got trashed. But I will print that picture out and put it with the documentation of the whole car, so you know that this belt routing is documented. Well, do you guys remember when I said that things back in the rear end were not going to be permanent? Well, they're not permanent. I had to take the coilovers out. The reason for that, in order to fit my brake lines and my fuel lines and something which I haven't even brought up yet, which is emergency brake cables. We're going to deal with that here shortly. In order to fit everything kind of up in this area, I needed to get the exhaust pipes back in because I needed to see if there was a conflict. And of course, you're supposed to do all this when you mock everything up. And I did everything except this when I mocked up the first time. So we're kind of going back and fixing things I didn't do right the first time. What I found out so far is that with the exhaust pipes in, the factory mounting point, which is right here for the rear brake lines, this bracket bolts to the rear housing. This conflicts right where the exhaust pipe is. Of course. So but it's an easy fix. I'm going to take it and probably cut part of this bracket, keep part of it, and physically just rotate and rebend the line so it kind of aims up this way and it's kind of out of the way of the pipes themselves. Fuel line I've already got moved, and so shouldn't be any conflict there because the filter is going to come off and mount right up here, and then the lines are going to come back through here to right there. So not a problem there. And of course I have to finish bending the brake lines on the body itself, and I've got a bracket for that so that I can actually physically hook up the flex lines. Other than that, I made some brackets for the e-brake, but they didn't work because I forgot that up here, the same bracket on the factory car mounts the brake lines, the hard line to the soft line to the rear calipers, and I didn't account for that. So this is the original factory bracket, and it just goes to show, don't ever throw anything away until you know for certain you're not going to need it. And it turns out I needed these because it's got the e-brake mount, it's got the mount for the brake lines, and all I've got to do is just reinforce this a little bit more. It's a little wobbly, but I'll reinforce it with another bolt back here and clean these up and paint them. But these are going to work just fine. So I've got them in temporarily just for fitment purposes. So next up, let's bend some brake lines, refigure some brackets. I need to find my fuel filter. I can't seem to find it. So let me go find that. I'll mount that and kind of start mocking everything up back here. I don't think there's enough room up in here for the camera, me, my hands, and everything. So I'm just going to have to kind of do a once in a while update. So I've got the lines initially rebent to kind of point the same right direction. I don't know if I'll be able to reuse that bracket or not. I'll work on that shortly, but the main thing is to get these things kind of up in the direction they need to go. But this turned out to be just a little bit bigger of a mess than I was anticipating, but I did get it done. So I had to make or modify and then make a bracket for my hard brake lines at the rear end housing. I was able to repurpose part of the bracket that holds the brake lines for the body. And I got my brake lines mounted, run. Everything's checked for clearance at full compression. I am probably going to run a little bit of heat shield on these lines because it is a little bit close to the exhaust pipe, but when under compression it does clear. Next, let's route and affix the parking brake cables. I got my rear brake brackets cleaned up, and let's go ahead and I've got one more. Well, wait, why is that? So I've got them mounted, or I should say I've got them ready to mount and get everything kind of lined up here, but I've got a little bit left to do on it because it's not quite secure enough, and I'll show you here in a minute why. So let me get this bolted in here. Okay, so I've got my bracket secure, but it's not as secure as I want it to be. And the reason for that is, you can kind of see, it's got a little bit of play right there. And of course, when the parking brake, when I activate the parking brake, it's gonna pull this bracket in, and I don't want that. So what the plan is, let's see if I can get up in here. There's a little bit of open space here between here and the side of the trailing arm bracket right up in there. See if I can get the camera up in here. There we go. A little bit of space here and there, between there. And if I could just put a spacer in between here and just run a bolt through and screw it into the side of the trailing arm bracket, then that'll secure this, and that will give a nice, just a solid mount for this part of the bracket. I did have to do a little disassembly of the parking brake system just to take the arm out so I could get my drill up in here to finish drilling this hole. All right, I've got my hole tapped on this side. Get my bracket back in. Now, I kind of guessed at the size of the hardware I needed this morning at the hardware store. But I figured if I could pick up a steel spacer, maybe a couple of washers to build up because it's not quite long enough, but that's okay. Steel spacer, and hopefully this bolt I got is long enough, which it is. There just flat wasn't enough room for me, the camera, my hands, and all that kind of stuff. So here's what I did. I went ahead and drilled and tapped my hole, put a spacer with a bolt, and just bolted that side of the bracket with that spacer to the trailing arm bracket. So basically now, my bracket's nice and solid. So let me put everything back together with the parking brake and we can continue getting the cables routed. Let's talk about the parking brake for a second. I know it's kind of a minor, almost seems like insignificant thing to have, but you know what? If you don't have one, the day you need one is the day you wish you had one. Back in the old days, I would have said, who needs a parking brake? Got an automatic transmission, that's what park is for. Or manual transmission, I'll just leave it in gear. But you know what? It's kind of nice to have one. And you know, it's also not a parking brake, it's also an emergency brake. So worst case scenario, hey, you lose your brake fluid, you still got parking brake. Well, on the original Firebird course, the second gen F bodies have got a foot operated parking / emergency brake. It's got a series of cables that run scattered willy-nilly all under the car, and it would have been darn near impossible to try and reincorporate that into the setup I've got now. And I didn't want to anyway. I kind of wanted to keep the center console hand-activated brake. So life was good. I swapped over the trans tunnel, kept all the mounting points, everything was great, until I went to hook up the cables. And of course there are parking brake cables that go from the handbrake, this side handbrake, when you pull it back to the actuators on the brake backing plates themselves. So I went to go and hook up the original parking brake cables. Turns out they were too short, and that was because the wheelbase on the 4th Gen F body is a little bit shorter than the 2nd Gen. I think it's I forget what it is. It's 108 inches on this one. I can't remember what it is on the earlier one. And so the cables wound up being too short, and they were actually interfering with the coilovers. So can't have that. So I went and did a lot of research and did a lot of figuring, and finally figured out that I could swap out the parking brake cable from a late 90s, early 2000s Silverado 1500 or 2500, and it would work. And the main deal is that, of course, I had to be able to keep this end, because this is the end that attaches to the lever on the brake backing plate. So I had to make sure that the new cable had the proper end on. Other issue I ran across, and if we keep the same sheath, I guess you could call it, distance on both cables here, old one and new, yeah, this is the original, this is the replacement, I think. Nope, other way. Anyway, when you go to the other end, here's the original Z28 cable. That's where it ends. And this is the longer cable. And turns out that that length really did give me a lot of working room. And so this was a good replacement cable. Only downside was that these ends are a little bit different. Now I've got a solution for this that's going to work. And I could not find a cable that had both the proper ends and was longer than the original Z28 cable. I know I've just confused the heck out of everybody, because this confused me for several weeks. But the main deal was I had to be able to keep this end. This was the important one. I can work with the other one. So let's go ahead and stick a cable in, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so I've got my end of my sheath in the locked in the front. Got it locked in back here at the brake backing plate. Now, instead of the cable before, I mean literally interfering right here and being really, really tight up against the coilover, now I've got plenty of room, plenty of cable. It's going to wind up kind of being right up against the fuel tank, but I've got plenty of room to play with here. So that extra length was what I really needed to make this work. And you know, on one hand, if I'd have mocked this up properly before painting everything and blowing everything apart, you know, it probably would have been better, would not have had to take the brakes back apart and re-drill my holes. But you can't think of everything. You can think of everything. I didn't think of everything. So let me get the other side done and get the cables mounted up, and the parking brake system will be complete. Okay, so the last thing I need to do is hook this to these cables. And what I did is I just took some 5/16 bolts, cut them down a little bit. So I'm going to just work it one at a time. Slide my end of my cable, drop the bolt in, and I've got Nylock nuts. It should hold this thing in just fine. All right. Well, moment of truth. Let's see if it works. With the parking brake engaged, I'm getting one side engaging and not the other, which means I just need to do some adjusting. But you can kind of see it's a little bit cockeyed, and when everything's adjusted right, it should pull those equally, which it's not doing right now. But you know what? I'm kind of tired of working on the brakes right now. I think it's time to work on something else. I know for a lot of you guys, wiring on a modern EFI engine, no big deal. For some other guys, wiring on a modern EFI engine is a huge deal. Let's take a quick look at what we got. Now, I'm not going to change any of the wiring. What I am going to do is I'm going to make it look nicer. Basically, what I'm going to do is just replace this plastic accordion, whatever this stuff is, with something that just looks a little bit better. But just for the basics here, of course, I had to put the harness in. I needed to get to the transmission hookups when they were accessible before I dropped the motor in. So that's why the harness is here now. The harness is going to wind up riding down underneath here, kind of out of the way on the back of the motor. But let's take a look at what we've got as we kind of work forward. So on the left side of the engine, I've got a couple of grounds. These will ground to the back of the head down here. I've got, and I did label these, I've got the knock sensor, plug for the knock sensor, which is right here. I've got the oil pressure, which is over, I believe it's down here somewhere. Can't see it. Let's see what else. Coming forward, this is injector number 7. Injector, here it is, injector number 5. This was taped off when we got the engine. I don't know, I'm gonna have to look on the harness and see what this is. It was not functional when I ran the engine, so I don't know. I'm gonna have to research that. This is the plug for the coil packs. That'll go right here. This is injector number 3. This is the, I think it's a purge solenoid. It actually winds up connecting right up there on the throttle body. Injector number 1. If we keep coming forward here, we've got, I believe, throttle position sensor, idle air control, and gotta remember what this is. I believe this might actually be map sensor. Actually goes up forward here. Down here, I believe this is temperature. Yeah, that's that actually goes over here, down, kind of back behind here, goes to the head here. That's the temperature sensor. And down here, I don't remember what this is. I'll find a place to plug that in. And same thing there. But there's a ground there, so there's probably something down there on the side of the engine. I just can't remember what it is. Over on this side, kind of the same thing. Coming off of here and over here, oxygen sensor, that'll wind up going down there. Plug here is cam sensor, which is going to be right down in there. Again, I know what this is. I just can't off the top of my head remember what it is. It plugs in around here somewhere. We've got injector number 8, injector number 6, coil pack, injector number 4, injector number 2, and then down here should be, I believe, air conditioning. And that'll come down here, plug into the AC. So, oh, and coming off of here, we have all of the plugs for the ECU, for the computer. The computer is going to wind up sitting back in here somewhere, and I probably won't finalize the mount on that until I actually place the fender in place, because it's going to kind of hide underneath the fender. So that's what basically all of this down here is. So initially I'm just going to work on, I'm going to start kind of up here and replace a little bit of the wrap at a time. Let's go look at the wrap I got. So what I got was some split sleeve braided wire loom from a company called Alex Tech. Not a sponsor. It's the first time I've used it. I'm kind of liking what I'm seeing so far. I'll let you know as I use it to see how well it is. But long and short of it is basically it's a pretty good looking sleeve. I think it looks better than that accordion-y plastic stuff. And it does a multi-wrap when it wraps the wires, and it kind of just stays there. It comes in different sizes. This, I believe, is 3/4. I got everything from 1/4 inch, 3/8, 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1 inch, and 1 1/4 inch loom, and it should cover pretty much everything on the underhood harness. I'm gonna do the parts of the rest of the harness on the car that are just visible. The parts that aren't, I'm not even gonna mess with. But if you can see it, it's gonna have this on it. So let me first off start by pulling the accordion-y, plastic-y stuff off the old harness. Kind of do it a piece at a time and work my way around the engine. So what I'm doing right now, I'm kind of getting ready to replace this section here of the harness itself. And the way the factory does this, they tape and they kind of cut and they tape, and section this harness, and sometimes it's kind of a puzzle to try and figure out how to take it apart, but basically you kind of unwrap the factory tape kind of a piece at a time until you expose the plastic itself, and so it's kind of exposed all the way. I've got one little piece right there that I can just cut carefully. There we go. All right. So this will just come off like so. All right, so hang on to this, and we're going to measure this. We're also going to measure the harness itself to make sure we go back with the right size loom. Everywhere where there's a junction with wires coming out, the factory is taped inside of the harness, inside of the plastic cover. I'm not going to mess with that because I don't want, you know, wires going crazy and everything. But I am going to want to kind of keep everything at this junction together, if that kind of makes sense. So the best way to describe this is just to go ahead and do it. I've got a section of wiring harness basically from here to here that I can replace. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my calipers, I'm going to measure the wire itself, the diameter of the completed wiring harness. I've got 0.7. I'm going to look for the widest or the thickest part. You don't necessarily want your wires to be constrained too tightly, although this harness itself, the wrap, does wrap in on itself quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and go with the 1 inch for this section right here. So I'm going to take my new loom and just kind of lay it alongside, figure out where to cut it. It's going to be right there. Take myself a pair of scissors. Okay. Now the instructions say to take some fire and just kind of hit the ends of this so that it doesn't fray. So let me do that. And I'm going to work my way up. I'll do this side kind of as on a fast forward so that you can kind of see what I'm doing here, but I'm just going to work my way up and just kind of work my way along this loom. Take the old plastic off, put the new loom wrap on. See how it looks in the end. I've still got a little bit of work yet to do on the harness, but I think it looks better than the old factory wrap. This does look a little bit better. So, even though I've got a little bit of work left to do on it, for the purposes of this video, complete. Well, that's going to do it for this week, guys. You got, what, 4 things done on the list of 1,000 things. You know, it's a small start, but it's a start. Look at it this way. That's 4 less things to have to do later. So, certainly appreciate everybody watching. Big thanks to all you guys for tuning in this week. Please like, share, subscribe, notify, blah, blah, blah. You guys know the drill. We'll see you next week. Everybody, have a great day.